Hi, my name is Ben Pickett, Director of Operations here at Oak Security Group, and today we're going to go through an installation of a mortise lock set. The mortise installation jig. Mortise cylinder spring, mortise strike, mortise case. Inside liner, indicator thumb turn escutcheon, outside keyed escutcheon, outside liner, inside and outside lever, inside and outside spring cassette, mortise lever spindle, faceplate, screw package, through bolts, faceplate screws, indicator assembly. In most situations, the door that you will be installing the lock set on will be a door that has already had previously a lock installed. So we're going to be focusing on the retrofit applications of this installation. Our door already is prepped with the mortise pocket, so our mortise case will fit like so. If you are in a situation where you need to prep the door for that mortise pocket, check the instructions for those dimensions. We are going to focus on the prepping of the holes for the attachment of the trim and levers and cylinder. First step of the preparation for the install is to prepare what is the most important dimension in most locks, but specifically on this mortise lock, the center of the lock, which in this case is the center of the case as well as the center of from screw to screw here. You can mark this dimension on the door in multiple ways. You could measure from that screw to this screw, mark your center, and then carry that line across. Or measure the distance of this case, which is roughly 2 15/16 of an inch. So I'm going to make a mark on the case here. And then that mark I want to travel onto the armored front of the case so that I can see it once it's installed on the door. That marking for most of the Oak mortise locks happens to be just above the latch bolt. Once we've got our marking there, we can take our case, place it in the pocket. Something to note that is very important is the spacing, the amount of movement of the case in the pocket will vary. And it's very important that that center mark is not at the bottom necessarily or at the top, but it is in the exact position when you put in the screws to tighten it. That is where your center will be. And so just to note, it's always recommended fasten in one screw in the case such that the case is exactly where it will be when fastened into the pocket. So now we have our case centered. We have our centering mark. So you don't mar your door, typically grab a piece of Scotch tape or masking tape. So we want to mark the center on both sides. So we have our marking here. You can use this tape as your center line, or you can put the tape on and make a mark on the tape. Just something that isn't making marks on your door. Next, taking your installation template, we need to make a few decisions based on the type of lock that you're installing. Up until this point, these instructions will be the same no matter if the mortise lock you're installing is a full plate, Escutcheon mortise lock, or if it is a sectional mortise lock. The differences between a sectional mortise lock and a full Escutcheon mortise lock have to do with the trim orientation. The primary difference has to do with what holes you will or will not bore into the door based on what you're installing. Sectional trim entails singular roses and cylinder housings, opposed to a full Escutcheon lock, which has an entire escutcheon that covers up this door. Typically, in retrofit applications, we highly recommend the full Escutcheon because you're dealing with doors that already have holes that we're going to need to cover up. And so full escutcheon in most retrofit applications is the right solution. Within the installation template, we have two options. One for the full escutcheon model and two for the sectional model. Once you've decided where you are for both the inside and the outside of the door, you will choose the function of the lock set that you're installing, and that will tell you which holes on the template itself need to be drilled. We are going to be installing a full escutcheon, so we will use the F2 designation. The lock set we're going to be installing today is a classroom security lock set with an indicator. So we will have a thumb turn and visual indicator on the inside of the door, and on the outside we will have the cylinder. So following our template, we need to make sure we are drilling our 1.25" diameter cylinder hole, as well as, because we're using a full plate escutcheon lock set, we will need hole A for the full plate escutcheon through bolts. We will have the lever holes with, depending on the handing of the door, which in our case, we have a door that is left-handed, and because it opens towards us, it's a left-hand reverse. With that in mind, we know the hole structure for the spring cassette through bolts to use in tandem with the lever hole. So in your case, you want to determine the function of the lock that you are installing, whether an entrance, a storeroom, a passage, any of the above. Find that lock set along with whether it is a full plate escutcheon or a sectional lock set to determine every hole that you need to drill before it is up on the door. Now that we have the center of the lock marked, notated that this is not necessarily square, this point here is what is important in our case, as well as on the other side, right at the top of the latch bolt. We have that indicated, so now we are ready to drill our holes. We want to make sure you remove the case before doing so, so you do not drill holes into the function of the lock set. On your template, it is notated to detach here. The reason to be able to cut this off is because we want to use our template on the side of the door in order to line it up with what is the center of the lock. With the entirety of the paper here, we can't see the markings that we've made that indicate that center. So we want to detach off this dotted line in order to get to what is indicated as the edge, whether low edge or high edge. What that's referencing is on the edge of the door, we have a high edge of a bevel and a low edge. And so you want to make sure you're either on the middle or on that high edge or low edge to be able to get that dimension just right. Now I've got that detached. I'm going to use my door to help me fold this over on a straight line. Now we're going to take our template and line it up with what we've indicated as the center of lock, not center of strike. I'm going to line it up on here and fold it around that corner. Now that we have it in place, take a piece of tape just to temporarily fasten it in place so it doesn't move on us. Next, depending on the function of lock, we will take our paper and mark out the positions of all the holes we need to drill. Position A for our upper and lower through bolts. As you see here, we already have a hole here, so it went all the way through, which we will touch on momentarily. Let's mark the other holes. We will have a cylinder hole here, and we will have a lever hole. And again, this is a left-hand reverse door, and so we will use this position and this position. So now we have marked the positions to drill on the outside of the door. We will repeat those same steps on the inside of the door to get those positions. The solution of installing the lock with the given template is one that for onesie-twosie locks works just fine, but it is cumbersome in some ways compared to the other solution that we recommend if you are installing any more than 1 or 2 mortise locks. This will be your best friend. What we have available for purchase is a jig to aid you in this installation. Because the entire install is based off of the center of the lock, this plate, when installed in the face of the door here, will be fastened with some screws in the same holes that your mortise case is installed in. So using the screws from your screw package, we will fasten the plate to secure it to the door. And these don't need to be overly tight, just enough to hold to the door. Once in, you can take your jig, open it up, and what we're going to do is place it around the door while inserting the post off of the face in through the jig itself. When on the door, the jig will automatically center itself. So this post gives us our vertical center, and then as we tighten the door, or tighten the jig, it will center itself horizontally on the door as well. So the things to pay attention to are that this plate and this plate are firmly against the center of the side of the door. So with all those things being true, we now have all of the positions available with bushings to guide us in the drilling of these holes. Something that is always a problem on retrofit doors is trying to drill a hole that is half a hole. If there is already a hole within the vicinity of the hole you need to drill, and what you have is a hole saw, that center bit will not have a meat to drive into to help guide the hole. And so these bushings, in situations where you're drilling through half a hole, give you the guide that you need so that your hole is exactly where you need it to be. In our case, the outside of the door needs our through bolt because we're using a full plate escutcheon, which is all dictated as tooltips on the jig itself, as well as the size drill bit to be used. These are all dictated in the instructions as well. We put them on the jig just to be extra helpful. So we are going to be drilling our full plate escutcheon through bolt holes on the top and the bottom. We have our lever spindle hole and the through bolts for that spring cassette, and the cylinder on the outside of the door. On the inside, we will be drilling again the through bolt holes for the full plate escutcheon, and then the lever spindle, as well as those through bolts for the spring cassette. And in this case, we are not needing another mortise cylinder hole, but rather the thumb turn assembly as well as indicator hole detailed here and using the provided bits. Okay. So now we finished drilling all the holes. One of the benefits of this jig is trying to drill holes from both sides or from one side all the way through perfectly straight can be a challenge based on using the bevel of that door. Oftentimes what we'll find is holes will get drilled using templates or that we will see on existing doors that have been drilled, and one side of a hole will get wallowed out further than the other because they did not drill them straight through. This jig eliminates that problem altogether, as well as giving you the bushing so you can do the entire drilling straight through with the jig installed, and each bushing will help guide you as you go through. So once we are completed with the drilling, we can loosen the jig, pull our shavings off. Nice clean holes. And because in this situation we had some holes pre-drilled, because we're using the full plate escutcheon trim, it will keep all of that covered. So now we will remove the jig face. And again, these screws are the same ones to be used to install the case. So make sure you set those aside. Typically, huge mess after drilling these, and we're good to go. The last piece of the first step in the install after prepping the door is to install our strike. So we'll take our strike, set it into the frame, secure it in. Again, if you have a door that is not prepped, information on the specifications for prepping that strike are included in the instructions. Second step in the install is to install our case. So we'll take our case. What you will see is we have the cylinder hole, which we want to make sure is installed up. So the latch bolt is the bottom portion on the side of the case. Place the case in using the same 2 screws we used for the jig. Want to make sure we leave these a little bit loose. Most all the screws, both in the case and in the trim, we want to make sure we do those final touches with either an installation driver that gives us control to make sure we do not over torque these screws, or with a hand screwdriver. So in these, we want to make sure in this initial stage we leave these a little loose so we've got some movement in the case as we assemble the trim. Now, as we can see on our trim, it is good confirmation that all of our holes are lining up in the door for the prep. That is a good sign. We want to make sure you check that before you move on to the next step. If something is off, you want to make sure you pull that case off and widen or change those hole patterns such that everything will install properly. Step 3 is to install our spring cassettes onto the door. These spring cassettes are what are going to hold the lever onto the door. You will see there is a small ridge on one side that is spring loaded. This is the lever or knob keeper. This is what will physically hold the lever on when it's installed. It's important because we need to make sure as we put these on the door, on both the inside or conversely the outside, that that lever keeper is pointed to the edge of the door, because that is on the side that the return happens. So in this case, my inside is going to be placed here and my outside here. We will need our spindles. These spindles will install into the case through our lever hole. Something to note, depending on the function of lock that you're installing, such as a storeroom lock, the levers in a storeroom lock are fixed and they do not include these spindles because the lever does not operate the case. So pay attention to the function that you're installing, for the parts may differ depending on that. The outside spring cassette, you'll notice, has oblong holes versus the inside that are all circular. Our through bolt is 2 pieces, one of which will go in the inside and the oblong into the outside. And this fixes it in place so that it won't be able to turn once installed. Another piece about the spindle, you will notice that there is a line. It's a break point on this spindle. One of the security features is, were your door to be in a situation where someone has over torqued your lever, this spindle is designed such that it will break. And the breaking of this spindle allows you to replace simply a spindle instead of having to replace the entire lock set as when someone tries to force a door open. When you install this, you want to make sure you install the brake tip into the case such that the longer section is what is going into your spring cassettes. So with that point in, we'll install with our keeper in the proper orientation, our outside here, our inside here, through our prepped holes. Again, we want to make sure we keep those loose so we've got a little movement for the other side. Okay, just want to make sure that those are snug. Don't need to be overly tight by any means. So now we have our spring cassettes installed, we're going to install our liners. In this case, for the CSTL lock set that we're installing, we will have both a thumb turn and indicator assembly on the inside of the door, and on the outside of the door, we will just have our lever and the cylinder, the mortise cylinder with the SFIC core. So in this case, I will install the outside liner because the cylinder will not be installed until after the trim is installed on the liner. So we have no more steps to do for the outside. Now that we have the outside liner on, before we install our inside liner, we need to take our instructions for the indicator assembly, and it will detail for you how to determine what handing you need to use for the two different indicator assembly plates. In our case, our door is a left-hand reverse, so per the instructions, we need the locked position to be on the bottom. So we'll take our assembly, now that we have the right piece, put it in these two holes there, click it into place, and then this piece with the longer spindle goes into our position there. Now that we have all that together, we can take our Escutcheon liner, fit it into place. Once it's all assembled, we can take our through bolts and fix the liner to the outside liner. Again, we want to make sure we keep these through bolts loose until the final steps so that we have all the movement that we need. Our next steps will be to install the trim onto here. One of the things we typically want to make sure we check before we fasten the trim on are just to check the functionality of the lock. You can take one of your handles, place it over the lever handle, and just make sure that everything is happening both on the inside and the outside as expected. Here, it is in the locked function because something that we can check is this particular function, when fully assembled, has both an indicator and a thumb turn on the inside of the lock, such that the user who is inside of the room has visibility into whether the door from a distance is locked or unlocked based on the indicator and not just based on the position of your thumb turn. So in our current position, the indicator is telling us that it is locked, and indeed that outside handle is locked. If we rotate that lever, should be unlocked. Now it's unlocked. Confirms the functionality that we wanted to see before tightening up all our screws and assembling the levers. Snug up our screws. Again, you don't want to over torque these screws, for it will cause the lock to bind on most occasions. Let's fasten these up in place. So now all our screws, our through bolts are all snugged up, and we can attach our trim. Trim will simply press onto the liner and is held in place once we install the lever. Something to note, on your escutcheons, the full plate escutcheons, the side of the escutcheon that has the outward trim is for your lever, and the cylinder is the one that has the concave hole. So now we've got it in the right orientation, place it over our liner. Our next step, take your cylinder and then your spring washer, place it over your cylinder, and then you should have a cylinder wrench to be able to place into your cylinder with your cam facing up. You want to make sure that when you place it in, it could be 180 degrees facing down. We want to make sure that it is in the proper position when you first install it. So in this orientation, we will make sure we get this properly threaded. The threads on mortise cylinders and in the case are really fine threads. So don't force this motion here. If you find it not wanting to thread in properly, make sure that you go in, loosen your screws here, maybe even take your trim, make sure that those screws are loose such that you have a little bit of movement in your trim when trying to get those threads started. Thread it in. You want to make sure once it is flush with the edge of your trim, you get it perfectly vertical. You can take it out and then confirm the functionality of the cylinder. Flip your cylinder wrench around, place it back over the throw members, turning to make sure that it is activating, which in this case we heard it lock, and unlock the lock. So now we've confirmed it's in position. Our next step is to lock the mortise cylinder in place. So we tighten up this screw, and now to confirm that it's in tight, we can stick our wrench in and it's fixed in place. Last piece of our trim before our levers is to install our faceplate. Something to note, once you have the lock on the door, prior to putting your faceplate on, make sure you do not close the door. There is a functionality in the latch that the faceplate holds back that will cause you problems if it closes prior to having it in place. Now we've got our faceplate installed. Last piece, take our two levers. Remember, you have an inside lever and an outside lever. The inside lever has the hole, the outside does not. So we'll take our inside lever, place it on. Always good practice before locking it in place. Just make sure everything is functioning still. Give it a tap. Same with the outside. According to the indicator, we should be in the unlocked position, which is indeed the case. Give it a tap. Throw our thumb turn. Lock is fixed. Now we've completed the installation of the door. As you can see, it's locked into the strike. The last step would be to install your SFIC core. Unlike in a cylindrical lock set that has a removable throw member, in a mortise cylinder, we'll take just the core, take our cylinder wrench, make sure that the throw members are in the proper horizontal orientation, and then taking your control key, should be able to install your core there. You can confirm that everything is working as expected. Now we are locked. Now we are unlocked. Now that we have the core installed, depending on the function of lock that you're installing, it may be a double keyed mortise device, or it may be a single keyed, or a passage, or privacy. Depending on the function, it will dictate whether there are additional instructions regarding timing for the cylinders inside of the case. So make sure to check your instructions to confirm that you've got that functionality correct. That concludes the installation of the Oak Grade 1 mortise lock. If you have any questions or concerns during this process, give us a call at 317-585-9830, or you can always email us at orders@oaksecurity.com.